Thanks for joining us here on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. We come to you still in the midst of federal funding chaos. In his second week in office, President Donald Trump and his budget officials sent our state and the rest of the country a lot of confusion with freezing of federal funds for more than 2,000 programs. This all stemmed from a memo specifically targeting DEI programs, but quickly impacting hospital accounts, teachers' pay, nutrition and food stamp services, veteran supports, and more. A judge blocked that only temporarily. Meanwhile, in our state legislature, it is starting the budget process to pass a new 2-year budget with mounting debates over Capitol Hill cash flow and the state's surplus. Here with me now, ahead of Governor Lamont's budget address in just a few days now, party leaders on the State Appropriations Committee, Senator Cathy Osten and State Senator Heather Summers. Thank you both so much for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Of course. So it's never an easy job to get a biennial budget done. I've been here now for a couple sessions in the last budget session, and it's always a lot of work that goes into this, especially with a part-time legislature like Connecticut has. But this year, there's quite the task in front of your committee. Let's start with the gap now that pandemic-era needs have stuck around in areas like schools and businesses, but pandemic-era federal grants have now expired. Senator Osten, I want to start with you.
So true. We have lost ARPA dollars, but ever since the ARPA dollars, the American Rescue Plan dollars, have been put out there, Representative Walker and I, who co-chair the Appropriations Committee, and our ranking Republican members, and Heather is new this year, but we have always said ARPA dollars, American Rescue Plan dollars, should be used for one-time expenditures. And telling people that was not just to limit liability, but was to put and set expectations around what they would spend those dollars on. So we think that that's really important for people to recognize that while those dollars are not there, those dollars should have been used for one-time expenditures.
And I would agree with that. You know, we have repeatedly said that to, our municipalities that also have received the dollars, and to the state, to be very diligent about how those dollars were spent. We did not want those dollars being used on new programs that would then need continual funding going forward, because they were, as Senator Osten said, used for one-time use.
Right. And we know, though, that in some cases that did happen anyway. A lot of groups like nonprofits and higher education said they needed more funding prior to the pandemic, and so they had to use some of these ARPA pandemic era dollars for some of those long-time programs, and they're now asking the state legislature for more money in the budget. How does the state and how does the Appropriations Committee sort of answer to that, especially with a state surplus right now?
Well, I think, Senator Osten may have her own views on that, but I think, we've made it, and it was very clear how those dollars were supposed to be spent. Right. I mean, I think there's a responsibility and an onus on the people that spent those dollars in a way that they were not intended. Now, you can come to us and ask us for more money. If you look at the demands that have been put on the appropriations budget and the committee to look at, there's a significant increase requests for dollars. I know there's one senator that has a bill in that's $3.1 billion just for one item that has been put on our agenda. There's a lot of need, but there's limited amount of resources. And I believe that the fiscal guardrails have put us in a place that we need to be able to have a balanced budget and to look at the critical needs and to go through the budget with a fine-tooth comb to see where we can, if possible, take cost out. But the bottom line is there's more demand than we have revenue for at this point.
And you mentioned the fiscal guardrails, Senator Osten. I want to ask you your thoughts on the fiscal guardrails debate. This has been happening for a few sessions now. There's been, a call from the governor as well as from Senate and House Republicans and a majority of Democrats to leave those alone. But especially this session now, there's been talk of tweaking them, possibly, amending the guardrails, because as you just mentioned, the hopes and lists of what is requested, from the Appropriations Committee from this budget requires a lot of funding. So, what's your stance on those right now?
So first I want to go back to something that you just talked a little bit about, and that was nonprofits and higher education. Yeah. So nonprofits 5 or 6 years ago were asking for $468 million, and they're essentially the safety net services for the entire state, and we need to have healthy nonprofits. Something that is really near and dear to my heart is to make sure that we have people working in our homeless shelters, that we have people working with people who have mental health issues or people with developmental disabilities. And I am only hitting the very tip top of the services. But this year they've asked for $260 million, and that's without seeing what the governor has in his budget. Right. Many of the things that they wanted were actually rolled into the budget itself. So our budget has right now about $1 billion in room under the spending cap, and that will be comprised of ongoing expenses. Of those ongoing expenses will include the nonprofits to a certain extent, will include education at the elementary education level, will include increases relative to salaries for state employees. Right. So we're going to annualize what is called annualize those expenditures. Relative to the guardrails, which is your question now, which I won't take myself off the hook on that. But I think that many people, we voted on the guardrails just 2 years ago. Yeah. Voted on by everybody. I was one of those that cast a vote to confirm those guardrails. And there is no problem with the basics of the guardrails. There is one that has that is not tied to the bond covenants that I think that we should look at, because the dire need in some services, like homeless services, is there. They're asking for $33 million. So I have been meeting with people across the board. There are some $3 billion, disregarding that one person's bill.
Does that make it $6 billion?
I have no idea whose bill that is, but disregarding that one bill, there is about $3 billion in requests from teachers' unions, from the nonprofits, from homeless services, across the board. From elementary education, the mayors would like to see us spend another $500 million. So these are expenses that have merit to them, and we need to look at them very seriously and really comprehensively. And so one of the areas where I think of the guardrails that we should look at is the volatility cap. Right. So the volatility cap was designed for that revenue that came in that was very, we were never sure what we were going to receive. But over the last decade, we have received billions of dollars under the volatility cap, and perhaps we can look at that to make it more reasonable on the funding that we're getting in. Now, I'm also in favor of paying down our pensions. Right. That has been a stranglehold on Connecticut's finances for years. And I'm happy to say that we're finally over 50% funded in both of those pension systems, and we should continue to keep them as one of our priorities. Yeah,
and we know the guardrails have been a huge help in that, and obviously, you know, that's led to the state's fiscal health that we're in right now. But
so really, I appreciate the need that is there very much. Sure. And I do want to support nonprofits and education, and specifically special education. We heard that the governor's budget is going to be fully funding education, but we did not hear anything about special education. Okay. We haven't seen the governor's budget at this point. I'm really concerned about the volatility cap. The volatility cap takes an income that is high risk. It's, you know, from stock sales, from capital gains. We don't know. We have projections, but we don't really know what that's going to look like, hence the name volatility. Right. And that money really is designed to then be transferred to the budget reserve fund, and that money we use to pay down our debt, whether it's the teachers' retirement, our state employees. But we have not experienced yet a downturn. We have not had a recession. Mm-hmm. And my fear is if we touch the volatility cap and we don't have that available revenue, if we do see that, we're going to be in a situation where we're going to go back and have to raise taxes here in the state of Connecticut. So those are things that I'm concerned about. I understand why people want to look at them. I mean, we heard even the governor saying, let's not touch the guardrails. I do believe that there are ways that we can look at some of the expenditures that Senator Osten has mentioned without having to touch the volatility account. Cap. We have to look at priorities. You mentioned in our budget right now is going to be baked in the funding for another state employee raise, which is about $400 million over the next 2 years. And there's many people that I've talked to that are saying, look, the state employees do a great job, but they've had a raise every single year. Their pensions, their benefits are really not in line with the private sector. Maybe we should put that on pause. There's $400 million that we could use to offset some of these other costs. Those are conversations that we're going to have within.
So I would first like to say, first I have to correct the record. It's not a new employee raise. It is the current raise that has to be.
It's a new contract.
No, it's not. It is not. It is the current raises that have to be annualized into the budget that were voted on last year by everybody in the legislature. And quite frankly, our pension system is now, for all new employees since 2017, which is more than 2/3 of the employees now, is a hybrid 401k. So it is not an expansive pension system. In addition to that, we have driven down our costs relative to our medical costs because we're on Medicare Advantage for state employees. So we have done quite a bit in our state employees. We're now on to Tier 4. We have each and every time driven down the costs and the benefits that are in both pension and health care. Also, I just have to, again, correct the record that looking at when I hear this regularly, oh, if we don't do this, we're going to have to raise taxes. Well, we had in the last biennial budget, we had increases in spending of $900 million that, again, was taken up by regular costs in the budget, not by a lot of new programs. In addition to that, we had $600 million in tax decreases that was voted on by all of us, and that was across the board. Democrats and Republicans supported that. I just don't see this as looking at making sure we're taking care of those who have the most need is going to put us in jeopardy of everything. And when we have a rainy day fund or a fund balance, depending on what you would like to call it, that is at 18% of the budget. When Governor Malloy came in, he had $0 in the fund balance, and he had, we were paying for operational expenses from the prior administration with bonding. We're not doing that. We're nowhere near doing that. We should look at things.
I know there's a lot with the fiscal guardrails debate, and I know this is going to continue throughout the rest of the session. It's been for the past few sessions, but really quickly in our last minute here, I do just want to mention, as I mentioned at the top, there has been a lot of, confusion from both directions on the federal funding freeze or unfreeze or not freeze that happened this past week. As of taping, the temporary pause is in effect. The memo was rescinded until Monday, but we know this was a shock for a lot of groups. The state here going into the session, a lot of lawmakers told me they knew there was going to be uncertainty, waiting to see what would happen from the new federal administration, President Trump and the White House. Senator Summers, I want to start with you and then go to Senator Osten really quickly. What does this mean for getting the budget done by June, as the legislature has to do if this uncertainty continues, and if there is actually in the future a stoppage of federal funding?
Well, first, I would like to just say here, I don't think it's correcting the record, but I think we just have a difference of opinion here. And I think it's very important that we keep our fiscal guardrails. Before 2017, we were in a much different position, but the reason that we are in the position that we are is because of the fiscal guardrails. So I think that's very important to recognize. As far as what's happening in Washington, we have a new administration. There was a memo that went out that caused a lot of chaos and confusion. There's been a second memo that has gone out to clarify that. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. But as far as getting the budget done on time, there has been many times that I have been in office that the budget has not been done in June. We have come back for a special session. So I think that this legislature will, we're going to have to wait and see what happens because no one knows right now.
Right.
And we will be here and continue to work until the budget gets done, how long that takes.
Yeah, and Senator Osten, you've been with Appropriations for a while. What's your stance on this?
I actually was in Appropriations when the fiscal guardrails were first developed, and it was never designed as not being discussed as we moved along. Having been someone who sat at the table to make those decisions, I know with this federal decision that they made to put out a memo that cut all federal funding was not done by accident. We cannot say that this is a new administration that doesn't know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. They've been around for a long time. They've been preparing to be in office for a long time. Not only did they cut federal funding, they also cut reimbursements for federal programs that had already been approved, that the expenses have already been incurred. There is $10 billion in federal funding that is built into our budget every single year, and they count for things like school meals. That's important for us to have school meals. I had seniors calling me up saying that, what am I going to do? I might not have a meal anymore this week because this is my only meal of the day. And then Head Start called me up and said, if this stays in effect, we are closing down the next day. That's daycare, and both Heather and I are from Eastern Connecticut. We are in a daycare desert as it is. In addition to all of that, regular mess that happened with that memo that came out. The second memo did not correct all things. There are still things that are not being opened back up, portals that remain closed, for things under the Department of Social Services, for things under the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. People are being required to answer questions related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and answering questions on how they treat women's reproductive health. Those are the questions that are being asked for grantees. And then on top of all of that, we all just got an email that they're looking at not signing any new defense contracts, something that we need in Eastern Connecticut. Unacceptable, and it's unnecessary to put this much stress on people who are just barely scraping by with the services that they need.
Well, we know, as Senator Summers said, no one has a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen here. I could keep talking with you about, both of you, about this for forever, but I'm sure we'll be checking in again as there's so much for the committee to do as you craft this two-year budget. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes to
Thanks
chat
for having
with
us. Appreciate it.
We appreciate it. We do still have more to get here, though, on The Real Story and our continued coverage of issues our state legislature is taking on. We're talking with multiple criminal justice advocates about breaking incarceration cycles. Stay with us.